presenters here, the panelists, Fred and Janice, to get things started. And hopefully we can get her added on to the webinar at some point this evening. So I'm going to kick things off. So again, apologies, but good evening and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight at the town hall. I'm Jen Fitzpatrick. I'm the Director of Partnerships and Sport Development with RCA. I am not the President of Rowing Canada Navarone, which is Carol, but hopefully she'll be with us here in a few moments. So this meeting is a combination of truly a lot of very lengthy work that's been taken on over the past year. We have a very diligent governance and policy committee. I have their names here. I just want to make sure I get this right. Give me a moment. We have the chair, Peter Klinkow, and several members, including Fred Enns, Paul Fritz-Nemeth, Kristen Henry, Susan Kitchen, and Andrew Lamont. And they have intently reviewed the Canada Not-for-Profit Act, the Canadian Sport Governance Code, the RCA bylaws, and several other documents to begin the process of alignment. As their work was concluding, RCA engaged with the governance consultant, Janice, who's here with us today, to work through the governance and policy committee recommendations with a smaller working group who completed the annotated bylaw amendment document, as well as developing the RCA governance renewal position paper that all of you would have received prior to the webinar. This has been an involved process to ensure that the work being done on governance is right for our organization. So before you is a notable change to improve RCA's governance moving forward. It's important to note that at a December 7th, 2023 meeting with National Sport Organizations of Canada, the Sport Canada announced that there will be an updated version of the Canadian Sport Governance Code released by April 2024. In that revised code, among several other changes, will be an upgrade of the word should to must. Okay, this is important word change that impacts our choices for governance practice. We continue to move forward with the proposed changes so that we can spend the next year reviewing our policies and our procedures in alignment for April 2025. So a key part of tonight's presentation is understanding section 24, amendment of the articles and bylaws in our current bylaws. This is the proposed amendment to the bylaws that you will be asked to vote on at the semi-annual meeting on January 28th, 2024. Supporting this change will allow you more time to propose changes in the bylaws and come together at the end of February 2024 to a special meeting of the members to then vote on the remaining governance changes. So keeping these points in mind, let me introduce you to Fred Enns and Janice Riven, and then we're going to move forward with tonight's presentation. Okay. Actually, I'm just going to take a pause here because I'm getting several messages. Let's see what people are up to. Okay. Okay. So Fred Enns joined the board in 2022 as a director at large. Fred, if you just want to give a little wave there, people see you. Okay. As noted, he is a member of RCA's governance and policy committee, and he has been absolutely a guiding light in helping us navigate many of the governance challenges that we have been addressing over the past year. Fred has spent his career as a well-known corporate lawyer in Montreal. Fred is involved in his local rowing club in his home area of Milton, Quebec. Janice Riven is our external consultant providing RCA with advice and counsel on aligning with the Canadian Sport Governance Code and the Canada Not-for-Profit Act. And she will continue to be helping us put into place the policies, the structures, and the practices to support our continuing objective, governance and excellence. Janice is a former executive of RBC and currently an adjunct professor at the John Wilson School of Business, where she has taught strategy, business consulting, and corporate governance to graduate level programs. She's been consulting in the field of governance for over 20 years to organizations across Canada and also internationally. So our goal, RCA is making changes in its governance structures and processes to respond to mandated requirements and to support and enhance these requirements for the better governance of our organization. The focus of tonight is to ensure that everyone in our rowing community understands not just what is being done to improve governance at RCA, but more importantly, why of doing it. We had such a full response for this meeting that we had moved it to a webinar format, which may explain some of the challenges we were having earlier on. But tonight's format is designed to inform first, and then we're going to open up to questions and answers afterwards. So please use the questions in the chat, so that Q&A function or the chat, and we're going to work through them after the presentation. There'll be plenty of time, even though we had a bit of a delayed start. Okay, so I'm going to hand over the presentation to Janice and Fred now in a moment.
Thank you, merci, et bonne soirée. RCA, comme toutes les organisations sportives nationales canadiennes, essaie de trouver de meilleures façons de gérer et de gouverner dans un tout nouveau monde. Comme tous les OSN et de nombreuses organisations dans le monde, RCA a connu beaucoup d'incertitudes et a géré des risques inattendus au cours des 2 dernières années. COVID a frappé chaque organisation avec la nécessité de trouver comment survivre sans avoir la moindre idée de ce que chaque jour apporterait ou de la durée de l'épidémie. Au même moment, tous les OSN ont été scrutés de près en raison des scandales très médiatisés impliquant Hockey Canada, aussi gymnastique et les autres. RCA, like every Canadian NSO, is trying to find better ways to manage and to govern in a whole new world. Like all NSOs in every organization globally, RCA has experienced a great deal of uncertainty and managing unexpected risks over the past 2 years. COVID hit every organization with the need to figure out how to survive with no sense of what each day would bring or how long the epidemic would last. At the same time, all NSOs came under scrutiny because of high-profile scandals involving Hockey Canada, gymnastics, and others. For RCA, here are the challenges we're facing. RCA must come into alignment with the compliance requirements of the Canadian Sport Governance Code by April 2025. The mandated requirements are being driven by Sport Canada's desire to ensure that all NSOs can demonstrate moving forward more effective governance through competency-based boards and the implementation of clear responsibilities and accountabilities. But like most NSOs, RCA has a volunteer board. Each member of the board by law is required to demonstrate a duty of care and a duty of loyalty, and that is becoming a lot more onerous. Boards need to do a lot more work to demonstrate their oversight and stewardship responsibilities. RCA's challenge and opportunity is to find the right ways for RCA to become a more resilient and responsive organization in order to effectively achieve our purpose. If you could go to the next slide, please. I hope you all understand why RCA needs to do work on governance renewal. Firstly, as I mentioned, we have no choice. We must align with the Sport Governance Code within April 2025 deadlines. And that means not just required bylaw changes, but putting in place all the supporting structures and processes. Le passé récent a montré à RCA que nous devons être plus adeptes à réagir à un environnement de risque de plus en plus incertain. Pour ce faire, le conseil d'administration de RCA doit continuer de passer d'une orientation opérationnelle qui est typique des petits organismes bénévoles à une orientation stratégique. The past has shown RCA that we need to be more adept at responding to an increasingly uncertain risk environment. In order to do so, the RCA board needs to continue to move from an operational focus, which is typical of smaller volunteer organizations, to a strategic focus. And more important and essential to our relevance as an organization, we need to be stronger as a more sustainable membership body. RCA exists for our membership. However, members can have diverse and sometimes conflicting objectives, which they wish to see RCA adopt. As an organization, though, we need to ensure that we are communicating openly, systematically, and democratically to hear member voices and communicate more effectively. How are we going to do this? Ensuring that board decisions are always informed by the appropriate voices. Modernizing our governance structure and practices to reflect best practices. Empowering the leadership team through clear articulation of objectives and measurable, obtainable, and realistic goals in a strategic planning process. Improving communications and transparency within our entire community, and changing our existing bylaws, structures, policies, and other processes to achieve these deliverables. Next slide, please, and I'll pass it to my colleague, Fred Enns.
Thank you, Janice, and good evening, everyone. In order to amend our bylaws to achieve these various changes that Janice has been talking about that we really need to try to do in the next time, in the year, in order to meet and align ourselves with the governance code, we need to first of all make an amendment to one particular bylaw in a way that allows us to do this without unnecessary time pressures. And this is section 24, which lays out a very restrictive time frame within which the board is allowed currently to pass amendments and submit them to members for approval. The changes are needed from time to time as needs arise, and this flexibility will allow us to take an extra month to consider the substantive changes needed in order to come into alignment with the Canadian Sport Governance Code within the time frame allowed by Sport Canada. As a result, the board has passed an amendment to section 24 to eliminate the requirement that all changes must be made between the annual meeting and the semi-annual meeting, with approval by members taking place only at the semi-annual meeting. As a result of this amendment, the board and the membership will have the flexibility to work on bylaw changes as the need arises. To confirm this change, all members will be asked to vote on this amendment at the semi-annual meeting on January 28th this year. Our plan is then to adopt the more comprehensive changes, which we will discuss today, and which have been posted in draft form for all members to review. Those changes will be finalized and adopted by the board on January 28th, after the semi-annual meeting, and the full set of changes will be subject to approval by the members at a special meeting to be held on February 29th. This gives us all more time while still meeting the deadlines to adopt and then implement these changes by April of next year. Le conseil d'administration a adopté un amendement à l'article 24 des règlements afin d'éliminer l'exigence selon laquelle toutes les modifications des règlements doivent être apportées entre l'Assemblée annuelle et l'Assemblée semi-annuelle. L'approbation par les membres n'ayant lieu qu'à l'Assemblée semi-annuelle. Grâce à cette modification, le conseil d'administration et les membres auront la possibilité de travailler sur les modifications de règlement en fonction de besoins. Pour confirmer ce changement, tous les membres seront invités à voter sur cet amendement lors de la réunion semi-annuelle du 28 janvier de cette année. Nous prévoyons ensuite adopter les modifications plus complètes dont nous discuterons aujourd'hui et qui ont été publiées sous forme de projet pour que tous les membres puissent les examiner. Les modifications seront finalisées et adoptées par le conseil d'administration le 28 janvier après la réunion semi-annuelle et l'ensemble des modifications seraient soumis à l'approbation des membres lors d'une réunion spéciale qui se tiendra le 29 février. So what are these key changes that are required by the Canada Sport Governance Code? The code has been adopted in order to enhance NSO performance through a process of governance improvements. The code states that these changes are designed to create independence and transparent and accountable governance, managed by a board of directors selected on the basis of competence to perform key policymaking and risk assessment functions with appropriate independence from management. One of the key changes is the requirement for boards to elect their own chairperson or president. This is a significant change for RCA, and one we had originally considered pushing back on. However, the code is now mandatory on this and other points, so we must align with it. Also, this manner of selecting the chair, or in our case, president, is in line with best practices in governance generally. And it also aligns with the revisions we, as a board, have been making with respect to the change from a more operational to a governance board, which the board was more so in the past. The code also requires the board focus on key responsibilities, which include risk management, strategic planning, and CEO evaluation and succession. These are already being addressed by the board and will be the focus of further refinements to current and new policies and procedures of the board. There are also key changes being made to adopt more effective governance for our organization as a whole. The other key changes which we are proposing are as a result of our governance review of all of the RCA bylaws, governance policies, and terms of reference, which have been examined over the past 12 months. Regarding officers, we propose changing the description of the role of the president and of the treasurer to focus on their roles in oversight of key management functions and to remove them from operations. Also, adding the title of Secretary General to the office of CEO gives the CEO the ability to sign off on national and international documents that require this authority. It doesn't really change the CEO role. Regarding committees, the board is required by the code to establish committees, including a nominating committee, governance and ethics committee, and audit and finance committee. For this purpose, there are changes to 2 of these committees that are dealt with in the bylaws. The name and purpose of the audit committee is being changed to align with the code. The audit and finance committee allows it to perform key financial oversight functions and to rely on those with financial expertise in order to perform enhanced due diligence. The board needs to have a strong presence on this committee, and the chair of this committee must be a board member to ensure full confidence in the reports made back to the board. We already have a governance committee, and its terms of reference have already guided the work this committee has been doing this past year. And I will speak more about the nominating committee in a moment. In addition, other changes will be implemented through a review of terms of reference for all board committees, which will be completed during this coming year. Regarding the borrowing restriction, the change proposed is to eliminate the restriction on borrowing in our bylaws in order to allow the board to approve borrowing for operating purposes like any other Canada not-for-profit corporation, as this is allowed in Section 28 of the Act. This greater flexibility for RCA to incur debt like other not-for-profit corporations will allow it to manage short-term liabilities through lines of credit and use of credit cards for payments, which are needed in the ordinary course of business. And it will also allow it to borrow and give security for important transactions, such as the vendor take-back financing, which is part of the negotiated land purchase transaction for the National Training Center. This will greatly simplify that transaction, which otherwise would need to involve a third party as property owner in order to accept the advantageous take-back financing, which is offered by the property vendor in our transaction. Then, with respect to the nominating committee, what are we working on? As I mentioned earlier, in order to have the structure that will ensure the selection of the board members in line with the Sport Governance Code requirements, there are changes in the bylaws to give the nominating committee more independence and a clearly articulated mandate to select candidates for the board that will meet the objectives of competence, gender and other diversity, and independence, which are required by the code. One of the key changes is to increase the size of the committee to include 2 board members and 4 outside community representatives. The latter 4 community reps will effectively make up the majority of the committee members. Also, the process of nominating board members is being changed to ensure that the committee is able to examine and put forward all of the candidates so as to ensure that the code objectives with respect to these diversity requirements and independent requirements are being met at the time of the election. L'un des principaux changements consiste à augmenter le nombre de membres du comité de nomination pour qu'il comprenne 2 membres du conseil d'administration et 4 représentants de communautés extérieures. Ces derniers constitueront la majorité des membres du comité. La procédure de nomination des membres du conseil d'administration est également modifiée afin de permettre à la comité d'examiner tous les candidats et de s'assurer que les objectifs du code sont respectés à l'issue de l'élection. Some members have criticized those proposed changes as they appear to take away rights of members to put forward candidates. However, this is not the intent, and it will not be the impact of these changes. The committee needs to be able to vet all candidates in order to ensure compliance with the code. However, a majority of the committee members will be representatives from PAC and the rowing community at large, and RCA members will continue to have the ability to put forward candidates to the committee for selection. In addition, these changes to the nominating process do not remove the right of RCA members to put forward a quote-unquote proposal as provided for in Section 163 of the Act, which may also include nomination for the election of directors, provided it is supported by the required percentage of members. And the time frame for a proposal matches the time frame for the other nomination process that we have in our bylaws. These improvements, additional improvements are also being made to our procedures to ensure that all board members receive proper onboarding and training. Now I'd like to turn it back to Janice.
Thank you. Avec les changements réglementaires nécessaires et souhaitables en place, il nous restera encore beaucoup de travail à faire. Voici quelques-uns des outils que nous mettons en place pour garantir des responsabilités plus claires et une prise de décision plus éclairée. With the required and desirable bylaw changes once in place, we will still have a lot of work to do. Here are some of the tools we're putting into place to ensure clearer accountabilities and more informed decision-making. We are in the process of creating very clear terms of reference for the board and for the board committees. These will describe specific duties and responsibilities of these decision-making bodies and be available on RCA's website. Another priority is to develop a stakeholder engagement policy to ensure that RCA has more effective communications and the desired level of disclosures and transparency with its community. The code requires boards of NSOs to adopt appropriate risk management approaches and be involved in strategic planning, as Fred mentioned earlier. So RCA is working on creating a formal risk management framework that will guide and inform the strategic direction of the organization. And to support the objective of greater accountability, better access to information, we're working on creating a formal policy management framework to ensure RCA policies are accessible and regularly reviewed. Fred, can you take over?
Yes. So just to summarize what the bylaw changes are and how these various changes are going to impact the bylaws as a document in and of itself, let me just go back over the main things that we're doing. First of all, we're streamlining the bylaw amendment process, as I mentioned at the beginning. That's section 24. This permits the board to bring bylaw changes to members at any appropriate time. Second, we're changing the maximum number of directors from 8 to 9. And this is made in order to ensure that we have a board with the proper resources and skills. We also feel that we need a larger board for purposes of achieving all of our governance functions. And one of the impacts of the president being elected as one of the members of the board is that we're removing the election of the president directly by the members. And so we need to elect an additional director at large in order for the proper number of directors to be on the board, and the board then to decide who amongst themselves will be the chair or the president for that year. Third, we want to clarify term limits for the at-large directors as well as for the athlete director and the president. The code has a set of guidelines with respect to term limits, which are really built around a 9-year term limit, assuming 3-year terms for all board members. It doesn't quite work in our organization because, in particular, the president and the athlete director have 4-year terms, and that is built around the Olympic 4-year cycle. So we've made some slight amendments to those term limits, but we've built into the bylaws the exact language that the code provides because of the fact that it gives flexibility to the nominating committee in particular to make adjustments with respect to term limits to make them fit within the length of term of the members of the board. And so that would be applied with respect to the president and the athlete director. And that's how we can make our rules match with the code requirements. Fourth, we're going to eliminate additional candidates being nominated after the close of nomination process, simply because we need to ensure there's appropriate vetting for all candidates before going on to the slate. And this vetting by the nominating committee is dominated by members who are appointed to the nominating committee. And as I said earlier, the majority of the committee members will be non-board members. And fifth, the board will elect the president, and members elect an additional director at large, as I said earlier, in order to complement the usual slate of directors that are there to choose from. And sixth, we're going to eliminate the restriction on borrowing. Again, this is something which is provided for in the Act. It's perfectly normal that not-for-profit corporations have the ability to borrow and give security on assets. Frankly, I don't know the reason why the restriction was built into our bylaws in the first place, and I'm not sure that any of the board members do. And so it seemed as a carryover from the past, which we could simply remove in order to allow us to operate as a business in the same way that other not-for-profit and NSOs generally operate. And it will greatly simplify the transaction with respect to the National Training Center, as I mentioned earlier. Next slide, please. So what are the next steps? If I can just go back over the timeline, which I hope we've made clear, and I know it has been confusing even to board members when we tried to work through this whole process and how this all works together. So I just want to lay it out and make sure it's really clear to everyone. The first step is the meeting we're having today, a meeting where we're using this webinar in order to try to explain, and then also we want to be able to have a question and answer period as part of this town hall to really listen and respond to your questions and concerns. Next, there will be the plenary session of members to discuss the bylaw changes and other initiatives. This happens on January the 27th at the semi-annual meeting, the day before the actual semi-annual meeting. So in the pre-voting perspectives and considerations session, which is Saturday, I believe in the afternoon. Third is the actual vote on the bylaw amendments to section 24, which needs to be approved by members on the at the semi-annual meeting, rather, on January 28th in that in-person meeting. Fourth, we're going to have the board meet again after having heard the responses today, and again having heard the responses of members at the semi-annual meeting. The board will meet again to go back over the proposed changes and finalize the proposed changes for adoption in light of all the input that we've received. That will happen on January 28th, and at that point, we will also call a special meeting for the end of February. And the next step will be a second town hall meeting, which will be held on February the 7th. Again, it'll be a virtual meeting like the one tonight, in order to, again, explain any additional changes and also to hear and discuss concerns of members. And then finally, there will be on February 28th, the bylaw amendments as adopted by the board as a result of all these discussions, which will be put to members for a special vote on February the 29th in a virtual meeting. And that hopefully is clear, and that will be the end of this particular process. Next slide, please. I guess we go now to questions, and I'll turn it back over to Jennifer to lead us through that.
Okay, thanks, Fred. I see that we have some questions here in the chat. Carol, did you want me to hand it over to you if you can access that information?
Yes, I can. Thank you. Apologies, everybody, for my technological issues trying to get into tonight's meeting. Mr. Alexander has posted 3 opinion pieces. I'm not actually seeing a question, but his opinion is being posted and his concerns. I would like to go to number 2, though. What N says is not correct. 11.1 clearly says the nominating committee is appointed by the board. His statement says, sure, one member can be put forward by PAC, but the board appoints. It may not be the intent of the change, but that is the change, and it's its use for a different intent is easily seen. The processes that we've been establishing at Rowing Canada Avron since I became president in 2017 is that when we are striking a committee, we put out requests for expressions of interest for people across the country that would be interested in being part of that committee. The same thing happens with the nominating committee. And so therefore the opportunity for anybody to put their hand up would be wonderful. And then we go through a process to ensure that person is vetted, and then the list of the committee members goes to the board, and that is where the board votes for or against the committee. So yes, they're appointed at that point. That's not new practice. That has been happening since the governance changed in 2013. Just wanted to make that point of clarity. I see there's a 4th statement. Hi there, can you clarify how the president's term of 4 years will work with having that position now being elected annually from the board after the AGM? Doesn't that mean any director could become president each year and not be in the same timeline as when the director was elected? I'm going to give that one to Fred to speak to. You're on mute, Fred.
The way we envisage this working is that the boards, the directors, the directors at large are normally elected for a term of 3 years. One of those directors is then elected by the board to serve as chair or president. That role has a 4-year term limit, and so that person's term would effectively be converted to a 4-year term. So that person is not re-elected annually. It's an election of the board to a 4-year term, similar to the way it is done now for a 4-year term. Then the question of time limits, as I said earlier, becomes a little complicated because of the fact that we have term limits, which the code tries to impose, saying that there could be 2 terms for a chair, which would mean under the code's assumptions, a 6-year total of service in that role. And whereas in our situation, it would be a total of 8 years. And the code has flexibility for these kinds of changes. That's one of the areas where they do understand that different organizations operate in different ways. And so they built that into amendments that can be effectively made to these term limit provisions by the nominating committee as and when needed, and also as and when it's necessary to make an unusual determination with respect to the interpretation of these rules that we're adopting, in the event that for some reason or other, a president should not complete the full 4-year term, for example. And in other circumstances like that, that could happen. It'll be in the discretion of the nominating committee to then make a determination on how those term limits can work.
Thank you, Fred. Mr. Alexander, yes, this appointment process has been happening, but previously other nominations, in addition to those vetted and approved by the appointed group, could be nominated and were not banned. Why the ban?
Did I answer that one, Carol?
Certainly, Fred.
There is no ban. As I said previously, the references in the bylaws to proposals under Section 163 of the Act have been taken out because it is redundant to repeat in the bylaws provisions which are in the Act. And for the same reason, at the end of the bylaws with respect to fundamental changes that are involved in bylaw amendments in Section 24, we're recommending the deletion of that whole list of what were characterized in Section 24 as fundamental changes, because again, it's simply repeating a provision that is there in the Act. We cannot remove the rights of members that are provided for in the Act unless the Act says that it can be limited by a bylaw. And in these 2 different instances, fundamental changes and proposals, we have no such authority, nor do we have any wish to make those amendments or remove those rights. Those rights of members are there and they will remain there. They just do not need to be repeated in the bylaw in order to be effective. So a proposal under Section 163 can be on any topic that a member wants to bring to the annual meeting. It can also be a proposal for the election of a person as a director, and it needs to be made 90 days before the meeting, just in the same time frame as what was previously provided for with respect to nominations and what is now going to be provided for with respect to nominations to the board. So members can do 2 things. They can contact the nominating committee in response to a call for expressions of interest when that comes out prior to the annual meeting, which will be before that 90-day time limit. And they can put forward candidates to the nominating committee. And they can also put forward a proposal, provided again that they do it in accordance with Section 163 of the Act. And that allows them to bypass the nominating committee effectively and to put forward their candidates, provided they have the percentage of support of other members that's required under the Act. We are not trying in any way to negate that right, which is provided for under the Canada Not-for-Profit Corporations Act.
Thank you. For Marion Bacon, one of the only powers members have is voting on bylaws. We do not vote on policy. Many of the changes proposed are based on yet unwritten policy. How do the members know what they are actually voting for? That's the first question. We'll go with that first. Fred or Janice?
I'll try to take that until I have a coughing fit.
Okay.
The bylaws bylaws are a very special set of internal regulations that support the rights and of the membership, and often limit the authority and powers of the board of directors. What the governance code is trying to do is to ensure that boards accept explicitly the responsibilities that they're supposed to be accepting in order to manage or supervise the management of the organizations in the best interests of the organization. And how this gets accomplished is by ensuring that membership rights that are required are embedded in the bylaws, but it's balanced by the board being given the power to be able to make changes quickly, efficiently, and with resilience in order to respond to changes in the environment. So this is what Sport Canada is looking for. So all I can suggest is that as part of the stakeholder engagement plan, as part of this drive to create more transparency, more disclosure, is that these policies will be available, especially the policies around the nominations process. There's nothing to hide. And I think the members deserve to see what policies are being put into place to provide the assurances that there is independence in the decision-making process, that there's transparency in the way the organization is doing its business, and that it's a democratic process.
Thank you. Also, her second question is, did you perform a risk analysis on these proposed bylaw changes? Who would like to speak to that? Janice or Fred?
Well, certainly as the consultant, when I came in, the governance committee had done an enormous amount of work, and part of the dialogue that I had with the governance committee to understand what the key issues were, the key concerns were exactly that, were the risk analysis. So yes, I wouldn't feel comfortable saying that we haven't done a risk analysis.
Thank you. Peter Van Rooyen, thank you for the meeting tonight. Question regarding section 24. What does the code/act require as a minimum amount of notice versus 21 days as contemplated? We have received a concern regarding impact to members who host regattas if a change is made with very short notice after entries are completed to lightweight rowing, as an example. Thank you. Fred, would you like to speak to that?
Yes. I'm not quite sure what Peter is referring to in the 21 days. Is it the provision in section 24.2, which is the 21 days advance notice to the board? I don't think so, because I think he's referring to notice to members. And we don't have any provision with respect to, perhaps he's referring to the section 24.5, where one of the provisions relating to at least 21 days prior to the meeting, members would be given notice of the change. That probably is the concern. So I understand better now. Well, that will not be changed. That is being deleted because it's, again, simply redundant. There's no need to state that there is a minimum of 21 days prior to a special meeting. That is a requirement of the Act. And there would always be a minimum of 21 days given to members. And whenever we hold an electronic meeting, the meeting, according to the Act, we have to give notice between 5 and 21 days prior to the meeting. If we were sending out a written notice for an in-person meeting, we can give notice over a longer period of time. But again, the minimum is always 21 days.
And that's just for the meeting.
Yes, and that would be a meeting, any meeting with respect to amendments of this type, bylaw amendments, or any other meeting for that fact.
Okay, thank you.
A member meeting, I mean.
Mr. Alexander, the annotations provided seems to suggest the code required this change to 11.1. Can you confirm this is in fact not the case?
The change to 11.1, I'm just going back to it to see what it is. Okay, then the 11.1 is changing the number of people on the nominating committee from 1 board member to 2 board members, and from 2 community representatives to 3 community representatives.
Paul Bernier, does the change in number of director requires a distinct resolution by the assembly? Then is it 2 or 11 is entered into the bylaws and the entire document is ratified or not by the assembly? That's a statement. I'm not certain if it's a question. Does the change in number of directors require a distinct resolution by the assembly?
I think the question is probably with respect to the fact that we have to amend the articles as well as amend the bylaws in order to increase the size of the board. And this is something that we had noted in one of the documents that we distributed with the proposed changes. Yes, if that is the decision that is made, it will not only be an amendment to the bylaws, it will be an amendment to the articles to increase the size of the board to a maximum of potentially 9 directors.
Thank you. Marianne Romack is asking, do you feel the goals stated in a previous call have been met? I'm not certain what you're referring to, Marianne. Oh, trusted partners, sound governments, informed and empowered members, partnered with universities, engaged provinces and association, safe, high-performance sports environments. And that's absolutely what we're working towards. And these changes will strengthen our organization and help us move forward in these very many places that we're working towards as a board and as an organization too. Marion Bacon, if you have done a risk analysis, what risks were identified? Can we see the risk analysis? This goes back to Janice.
We didn't perform, we didn't create an explicit document to validate the decisions as we move forward, looking at what had to be changed because of the governance code and then our proposed changes for more effective governance. This whole risk analysis exercise is going to be embedded in a risk management framework, which is in the works to support the requirement that the board of directors become more actively engaged in the risk and strategic planning. So no, there's no document to put forward. It's something that could be worked on, but I'm not sure that it would be the best use of resources.
And maybe I can add that in looking at all of the recommendations of the Canadian Sport Governance Code, and in looking at all of our governance documents, basically the bylaws, the governance policy that RCA has, which is a fairly comprehensive document, which has it's something like a terms of reference really for the board itself and other functions within the organization. And then there are terms of reference for each of the committees. And there are also various policies. All of these are documents posted on the RCA website. We've been looking at all of those documents and looking at the governance code, but also looking at best practices in governance, and with Janice's help, examining these governance practices and trying to ensure that what we are proposing is to improve those functions in one way or another. Obviously, if you're asking what is the risk of making one of these changes, we're not putting forward any risk any proposed change rather, where we've identified a risk that such a change would actually be counterproductive. We are only putting forward changes that we think are going to be not only positive, but highly beneficial to the organization. And part of that is in implementing a role for the board, which is more clearly defined with respect to risk management, strategic planning, and CEO supervision and evaluation. And that is the role of the board, and that is the level at which we as a board want to act in our governance capacity to make sure that we are implementing on a regular basis, and we've been doing this already in our past board meetings, having a risk assessment session as part of every meeting to talk about and identify risks that the organization changes, try to categorize the level of risks which are of greater importance and need to be addressed sooner, and so on. So this is very much focus of the board already, and it will be built in to the policies and procedures that we are going to be developing over the next year, though it isn't something that requires a bylaw amendment per se.
Thank you. Dave Derry notes, the other day I Googled Ministry of Sport Governance Code, and the first hit took me to a ministry page that showed a link to the code. Clicking on that link took the reader to page not found. I eventually found the code on the Canadian Olympic Committee page, but I'm not sure if the code is current. Could you send a copy of the current code to the members so that we can read it for ourselves? Dave, as noted earlier in the introduction, it was at the December 7th meeting that Sport Canada informed us that there were going to be changes to the code, that we won't receive it though until April 2025 or 2024. So we are working from the same document. It's an old document. It's not been updated. And we are happily looking forward to getting the new document in April. What we're working from right now are the pieces that they shared with us at the Sport Canada meeting, that changes would occur. And specifically that all throughout the document, wherever it says should, must will now be the word that's in there. And so that's where we've gone to with the changes in our suggested changes rather for our bylaws.
And Janice, if the concern is just to make sure that the member is looking at the right document, don't we have a link on our website? I know it was in one of the information documents that went out about the proposed changes. There was a link embedded in the document as well.
I see below that there's Lindsay has put in a link. So Dave, give that a try, but that'll be the old document that we're all working from right now. Thank you, Lindsay, for doing that. Judy Sutcliffe. Members will remember DDRA's request that RCA be required to present to the members at the semi-annual meeting a financial update to September of the preceding year. It was voted down partly because the treasurer promised that there would be a quarterly financial summary provided after approval by the board at regular board meetings. The last quarterly financial summary was posted on November 2022. The proposed changes to bylaw section 17.5 removes a restriction on borrowing. How can the membership know that the board of RCA is in position to undertake unrestricted borrowing when the membership does not know the status of the association's finances? Further, reference is made by the speakers to democratic process. The democratic process include having up-to-date minutes being posted on the website. The last minutes posted were June 29th, 2023. So we'll go to your first question, which is around bylaw 17.5, removing the restriction on borrowing. And how can the membership know the board of RCA is in a position to undertake unrestricted borrowing when the membership does not know the status of the association's finances? Fred, did you want
Derek Ventnor here on this call? The financial information, as far as I know, is available on the website, but I really can't speak to this, Carol. I'm sorry.
I know what you're speaking to, Judy, And yes, after the December 15th meeting where we would have approved the minutes from the November 1st, 2nd meeting, those finances should have been posted. And I will follow that up with our new treasurer. He's learning an awful lot about our processes. And although we did speak to it a while ago, it was missed. So that's on me. I will follow up with that. Thank you.
With respect to minutes, perhaps we could address that as well. It is not a requirement, nor is it general practice for minutes of board meetings to be posted and made public. That is, as a matter of fact, something that is clearly discouraged under good governance practices. The minutes of members' meetings are public for all members to consult, but not minutes of board meetings. And so there probably will be more information coming out about this, but I think that is a change that's going to happen, and that minutes of board meetings are not going to be posted regularly.
Thank you. Peter Van Rooyen, follow up to previous question. There is concern of impact to regattas if a change is made with relatively short notice at any time versus current, where changes could impact a regatta can only be made at the semi-annual AGM. Thanks, Pete. I understand. I'll just speak briefly to it, and Fred, feel free to follow up. Recognize that regular rigor will be in place when decisions are made. We know that when decisions are made at a meeting of the members, there have to be processes put in place for implementation. As we did with the rules of racing last year when they were passed, we didn't implement them immediately. We waited until after the CSSRA regatta because that regatta schedule was already posted a year in advance. And then it became implementational for the summer programming. So these are the nuances of effectively making changes in an organization, is being reflective of the work that's being done in the community and how it impacts the community. So I appreciate the question, and I hope that's helpful in the answer. Marianne Romack, sorry, a follow-up question. Can you please tell us what has happened on these items in the last 6 months, plans, committees, decisions? Marianne, I appreciate your question, and I will happily do this offline. Our focus tonight is on the changing governance for Rowing Canada Aviron, and we'd like to focus on those questions. So I will send me an email. I know you have my card. Send me an email and I will follow up with you absolutely on those points. Derek is here. Derek said, I'm here. Can I speak? You can if we can connect you. So, Alethea, can he be connected as a panelist?
Well, apparently I've now been given the power of God. Here I am. Thank you. Jen or Alethea or whatever. I'm not going to speak long. I just going back to Judy's question about the quarterly reports. I can't answer why, and I'm not going to throw my predecessor under the bus any more than I feel like. I don't know why they haven't been posted for roughly a year. It doesn't matter. We are working through. Since I've taken over as treasurer in September of 2023, I've been working quite a bit with the financial staff on changing a number of things, and getting things more. I'm cautious about using the phrase "more in order" because it's not that there is anything being done wrong or inappropriate or any of that. However, there are processes to clean up and there's reporting formats to clean up, and that's taking some time. I'm hoping that we're in a position to do that for the quarter just ended, December 31st, 2023, so that I'm able to do that in time for the board meeting at the conference. And if that's the case, then that quarter will be released in accordance with Tom's commitment that he made a year plus ago. If it's not done, then it will be done starting with the final quarter this year and going on quarterly from there on after. The reports are going to be done so that they're simplified, more meaningful, and they'll include a narrative for me for more specifically to better help the non-financial types, which there's many, understand the statements that are being presented, and a narrative that kind of explains where we're at, where we intend to go, all that kind of stuff on a quarterly basis. So that's what will happen, but it's taking some time to get there, and I just ask for a little more patience. That's all I've got to say on that for now, Carol.
Thanks, Derek. Thanks for speaking up. Appreciate it. Next, we'll go to Mike Walker. RCA would not be able to undertake unrestricted borrowing without some sort of security or collateral to satisfy the bank. Since RCA's assets are limited, the ability of the association to borrow would likewise be limited. Thank you, Mike. And Pippa, there's a reference for you there, Judy. Derry says, thank you for supplying the link. Peter says, thank you. And Judy says, thanks, Derek. And that takes us, oh, there's a new question. Peter Walsh, we seem to be in a rush to make many serious changes to our bylaws, and the only deadline I have heard is April 2025. Can we not leave section 24 alone and just deal with those changes related to the code, which it appears we're in good time to work through? Fred or Janice, would you like to speak?
Yeah, I'd be happy to answer that. Peter, if we left 24 alone, basically we could not make any of these changes at the semi-annual. We'd have to wait an entire year till the next semi-annual to do that. And that would give us very little time before April to then make the consequent changes that we want to make to our policies and procedure, our terms of reference, and all our other governing documents, which are going to be the completing part of this whole exercise of updating our governance structure. The bylaw amendments are really just the first step. And as you've seen, there's a number of things we've discussed tonight, which are only partly, if at all, reflected in the bylaws. We've tried to explain why we're going, where we're going, and the larger picture, even when it is not a bylaw amendment, but really a policy change. And so we need time to do that. We also need to put that first step together and do it together with members in such a way that we can discuss this in a way without excessive pressure. We knew that putting everything on the table quickly for this year at the semi-annual would not give anybody sufficient time to consider these changes properly. So we needed to have at least another month and at least a separate meeting where we can deal with just those changes by themselves. So that's why our first step is, let's take the restrictions out of section 24 so we can have an extra month, and so that in the normal course we can do this when and as it needs to be done, as opposed to having this straitjacket of the semi-annual meeting procedure. I understand that for some people that may be what you're used to. It seems like an appropriate time frame, and for regattas it maybe ensures that you're going to have notice. But as Carol said, the intention is not in any way to implement a bylaw change in such a way that there would be surprises or improper consequences for clubs that have already got regattas or of other events planned or in the works. But rather it's the time period between when the board adopts a bylaw change and the members are asked to ratify it that we're really trying to give that a much more flexible time frame so that we can do this during the course of the year as we need to.
Thank you. And Tom, the repost, this is Tom Hawker. The reposts were approved quarterly at board meetings and were to be posted to members. Not sure what has occurred. That was a commitment to members, as Judy noted. So not sure what has occurred regarding the last one posted November 22nd, as it were to be. Thanks, Tom Hawker. Reports, thanks. All right, thank you, Tom, for joining us tonight as well. That is our last question. And so we'll move to the last slide. Thank you very, very much for joining us tonight and for showing your dedication and interest in the future of RCA by attending this first town hall. We hope you will encourage your colleagues and fellow rowers to attend town hall number 2, which is on February 7th, 2024. If you have further questions, please send your queries to rca@rowingcanada.org, and we will follow up with those questions. Those questions will also help inform our next town hall. Please note that our next step right after this meeting, hopefully, will be to post a recording of tonight's webinar in the governance section of the website. So please share that with others who were not able to make it tonight. We want to be able to address all concerns and know that we are all working towards the same purpose, to ensure that RCA continues to strive for excellence in all its endeavors. There is a faction in our organization. They're not interested in improving RCA, although they purport to, but they would rather sow seeds of doubt and stymie the growth of RCA. While questions of clarification and differences of opinions are valued, the bigger picture of the organization must guide your decision-making. Be a critical thinker. The Governance and Policy Committee, the Governance Working Group, and the Board, with professional governance guidance, have spent significant amount of time to research, challenge, and question before bringing this presentation to you. Please ask your questions, get clarity, and decide accordingly. As noted, rca@rowingcanada.org. It is my hope that you support the processes that are based on the bylaws of RCA to make changes to the bylaws for better governance for our organization. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us tonight, and thank Jen for pinch hitting for me rather, when I could not get into the session. I appreciate that very much. And I thank you all for your patience in the delay, because I couldn't get in, the meeting couldn't start, and unfortunately, we finally made it work. So thank you very much for your patience tonight and all of your great questions. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you to Janice, who is very ill right now, and she's made, well, she looks like she's gone, but she was struggling to speak tonight. She has such a wealth of information, and she's been so supportive throughout this process for the last year. So we really appreciate her. And thank you, Fred, for taking on the representation of the Governance and Policy Committee and the good work that was done over the course of the year by the team. We really appreciate it. Everybody, have a great night.
I said, Carol, let's go for pizza.
It looks like it's still recording. Can you shut it down, or can I?
I tried to earlier and it wouldn't let me. I'll try again. Oh, the recording file will be converted. I don't know. It seems like it's still.
I know. Maybe when we hang up, it'll.
Yeah, perhaps. That's weird. Yeah, because it says record.
I know. I keep getting the webinar recorded. Anyways, that's interesting. Okay. Were you able to copy the questions at all?
Yeah, I have them all.
Okay, let me see here.
I don't know what happened earlier.
Oh, I don't know. Do you know how it eventually started to work, or?
She got in as a regular participant and I had to promote her to a panelist. So I have no idea what was going on there. Sorry, my kids are yelling in the background.
I can't hear them. That's okay. Okay, interesting. Well, at least now we know though for sure that you cannot, like, when someone gets in, like, elevate them to that.
Yeah.
Okay. Right.
Because you started the webinar, it might record on your computer. It'll let you know though, like as soon as it shuts down, it'll like.
Oh, did I start it? I thought you did.
So I started it, but then I had to exit. And then when we jumped on, it promoted you to host and me to co-host.
Oh, I see.
So it might be recording on your screen.